love, for me, that aliveness in my heart space and going out into the world and going, God, I love you. To the whole of the web of life is intrinsic to who I am and to how I am and to how I want to show up in the world. The energy with which we show up in the world is probably the single most important thing that defines how the world works. And it's a choice. I choose. I could go out into the world and be in horror and despair quite easily, or I can go out into the world and look at a tree and go, God, I love you. Or the chickens, or the red kite, or the hill, or a concept. And it doesn't mean that I don't also feel outrage and despair and horror and I cannot believe these things are happening at things around in the world. But the textures, the wave, if you like, of my personal energy is gratitude, compassion, and joyful curiosity that, wow, that's amazing. I wonder what happens next.
Hey everybody, it's Andrea doing a little intro for the talk I had with Manda Scott, who is an amazing person, and she's the person who introduced me to this idea of Thrutopia. So it's about writing instead of writing dystopias or utopias, writing through ways, paths, different paths towards the future. We talk about that a bit in the podcast, but you can see why this appealed to me in terms of waymaking and trying to understand intelligences as different ways. We just were meeting here for the first time, and you'll hear, we warm up to each other, just learning about who one another are, what's the right word for that, in the world. But then we get to this wonderful place together and find some really amazing resonances and common patterns. And I hope you will check out her podcast, Accidental Gods. It's beautiful. It's wonderful to hear her voice on the audio. And it's also a wonderful place to explore a lot of possibilities for how we might reimagine all the many different sectors of our societies. And it's an introduction to some incredible people all around the world who are doing amazing work every day. And whether it's through their scholarship, through what they're creating, through their actions, Manda's really created this space of, it's almost like a school. You can listen to her podcast and really learn about a whole new world. Some of you probably already know some of that world. Some of you, like me, will just be discovering it for the first time in the last couple years. But either way, there's definitely something there for you. And also, Manda's a best-selling author in fiction and some really wild and beautiful books, which I haven't read yet, but they look wonderful. But I did read her latest book, Any Human Power, which is similar to what I just said about the podcast. It's opening new ways for us to reimagine the world we're in right now. And I won't say too much about it because we're going to talk about it here. But I just want to say thank you to all of you because you all come from so many different backgrounds. And for example, I know some of you see shamanic thinking here in the title and you think, oh, what is Andrea doing? Because, you're schooled in a certain kind of philosophy or neuroscience where the word shamanic should not be mentioned. For others, it's kind of the opposite. You're more interested in ways of connecting with the world that are lived and sensuous and some not necessarily connected to certain methodologies of philosophy. And I know the more computational or other kind of podcasts can be a stretch for you, but we're still figuring it out. I'm still figuring it out. We're all here in this together, trying to figure out how to communicate about all these different ways of being in the world, all these different approaches to thinking and thought and feeling. And the main thing for me is just the love part, that we're coming at it with at least the attempt to connect to one another, to open our minds and our hearts, and to look for better ways of doing whatever we do and whatever field we're in, because that feels like the way to have the best experience of life. If we want to think of it kind of selfishly, and then if we want to scale out and think about our responsibility and to each other and to the living beings and to this incredible experience that we're having and that we're part of, then that seems also like something worthy of doing here together. Listening to each other's different worlds, ways, perspectives, and feeling the love in it. And that connects us, right? Even when we don't understand everything fully. In any case, Manda and I get into this a bit as we find our way together. And I'm really happy to bring you this conversation. I'm really grateful for her work and her voice. And I hope you enjoy this and have an interesting ride. And yeah, thanks for being here. Bye. Okay. Hi, Amanda. It's so nice to meet you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Andrea. It's lovely. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Well, I've only just discovered you and your work, so I have to say that up front that you're a best-selling author. You've written all these books that I haven't read yet. I've only read the latest one, only because I just discovered you.
That's good.
But I do want to say that off the top so people know that you've done a lot in your life. You're also a veterinarian. You're now a podcast host of an amazing podcast, Accidental Gods. But we're going to get into all that. But just to start, feel free to say whatever you might want people to hear right off the top. But I want to start with this idea of Thrutopia.
And let's also tell people I am not a veterinary surgeon anymore. I
No.
couldn't do that and everything else. But it's there as part of the holding of who I am. So Thrutopia came about 2021. I had a series of shamanic visions. We can go into that if it's not going to freak out your viewers. That I needed to be writing the book that has just been or is just about to be published. And part of the understanding of that, I'd been writing historical novels for 20 years. And I had a vague idea that if I could show who we had been, we could see who we could be, particularly on the islands of Britain. I think we were what Francis Weller would call an initiation culture, a whole culture, an indigenous culture, until the Roman invasion of Britain 2,000 years ago, at which point we became a trauma culture that Britain then very successfully exported it around the world. I'm not proud of this, you can tell. And that nonetheless, I have a sense that we are in the dying days of the Roman Empire. Rome brought the trauma culture value system that hierarchies of people with straight white men at the top, and nothing else matters except that those straight white men feel relatively comfortable and gather all the wealth. And everything has been moving towards that ever since. And that is taking us to the edge of biophysical crisis. It's taking us into a polycrisis that isn't just biophysical, but is quite spectacularly so. And we need to change this, and that we can change this.
I like it that you already set it up as almost like a landscape or an orientation that was developed so that all these paths are sort of leading to the same place, and the same place is not a place we really want to go
Not a grand
if we
place.
think about it.
Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly that. Yes. And one of the metaphors that people use a lot is that we're all locked in a bus with the old white men are holding onto the wheel, they've got their foot in the gas, and we're going straight for the edge of a cliff. And nobody really wants that. I don't think even the old white men really want that. They're just pretending it's not there. And so the question is, how do we turn the bus? And one of my great literary heroes is Ursula Le Guin, who said, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems unassailable, but then so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can, by human agency, be resisted and changed. And often the impetus to that resistance and change comes from art, and often our art, the art of words." And so we nicked that and used the title of the book is Any Human Power for exactly this reason, because I believe her. And then Amitav Ghosh in The Great Derangement said, "We may well hold politicians and bureaucrats culpable for their complete failure to act in what he calls the Great Derangement. But we may also, future generations may also hold writers and artists equally culpable because it's not the job of politicians and bureaucrats to imagine different futures. It's our job." And I would say politicians and bureaucrats who are capable of imagining different futures would not keep their jobs for very long. The system is designed to perpetuate the system. They are there because they're not going to change it. So it's up to us. And that kind of hit me as a bit of a, oh my goodness, what have I been doing for the past 20 years? Okay, now this needs to happen. And I had the opening scene of the book and the thread and just go away and write the book. And at the same time, it needs not to be just me. So I set up something that we later called the Thrutopia Masterclass because I had realized that I couldn't write the book. I wouldn't have been able to write the book had I not also been host of something called the Accidental Gods podcast. And the point of the podcast is to bring us to the emergent edge of possibility where we can emerge into a new system on the understanding, systemic theory that emergence into a new system, the new system is not predictable from the old system. If it is, it's not a new system. But we can bring people to that emergent edge. And that emergent edge is one where we are holding very different value systems. So I intend with everything that I do to bring us to that emergent edge. And Accidental God says, you know, if we all work together, we can still craft the foundations of a future that we would be proud to leave to the generations that come after us. I want our grandchildren's grandchildren's grandchildren to look back and go, my goodness, everything was barreling towards the edge of the cliff. And yes, they left it way too late. But when they really needed to, they acted and they got it right. They got it right enough, good enough
Yeah,
for
well, in
now,
the
safe
book,
enough to try.
there's a lot about this. I mean, about
Yeah.
it's a family in many, and
Yes,
even an
totally
expanded sense of family, and we really feel the generations and the responsibility and all that. But before we get into the book, which Any Human Power is the name of it, let me just see if I understand correctly. So you had written all these books for, you said, 20 years, and they were successful and on a certain path, building certain paths. And you started this podcast, which for people who don't know yet, I think of it as you're presenting all of these new possibilities for changing those systems that you just described that people are sort of trapped in. Even the people who are at the head of them, if they tried to change, they would sort of lose whatever they've worked their life to attain, so they don't change, and all those systems, right? But you're in your podcast interviewing people, talking to people who have like stepped out of that and see different paths, and you're opening us to them in all kinds of realms, from, you know, finances to, I mean, I found you through transportation, through the Riversimple,
Right.
but I mean, you really
Right.
talk, yeah, you really talk to sort of everyone. So I'm just trying to set it up a little bit as, because in a way you were telling stories before, and now you're telling very different stories after the podcast, but the podcast, or not after, it's still going on. Thankfully, it'll be going on a long time. But
I hope so.
you're setting up new paths, right? And some of them are
Yes.
called fiction, and some of them are called nonfiction, and so on.
Yeah.
But this relates to this idea of Thrutopia. So maybe we can
Yes.
now talk about what
Sorry,
that
I
is,
wasn't
where
being
that
very
came
precise,
from.
was I? Okay, it came from a paper by Professor Rupert Reed, then was a professor of philosophy at the University of East Anglia, and he published a paper in 2017 in the Huffington Post talking about Thrutopia. He said we don't need dystopias because we don't need any more people trying to frighten us with how things can go bad. If that was going to work, we wouldn't be where we are. And we don't need utopias because there's always a bit of a jump cut of things were bad and then lo, something happened and miraculously now we're all in a place where it's all beautiful and lovely and grand. We need to be able to see how to get there. And
And I
that's
love
the
that, because
Thrutopia.
this podcast is a lot about either or, beyond dichotomy. And that's a way of
Right.
not having the
Yes.
either or that you just
Exactly.
described. So,
Yeah.
and opening paths, which you don't probably know about my philosophy, but it's all about understanding our
Fantastic.
cognition as paths. So it's
Yes.
wonderful.
Yes. Yes. Exactly that. Yeah. Creating new networks in our brains,
Mm.
creating new creative
And our
possibilities.
action, you know, I mean, it's not
Yes.
just in the
Yes. And
brain,
then our
it's
actions.
an
Yes.
embodied
Yes.
act. Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. So it is exactly that. It's the way, if any story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, dystopias have the bad endings, utopias have the good endings, but you can't see how to do it. This is the middle bit. This is
And
how do we get here?
it's through, like THRU,
You,
like through, like
topia.
a throughway or something.
Exactly that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's wonderful. So you discovered that in 2021.
Yep.
You're friends with the author, has been on your show, and
Rupert Reed. Yeah, yeah. He's a really cool guy. Yes, we get on really well. Yes.
so
And so he said when we set up the masterclass, I said, I don't quite know what we're calling it. And that's when he said, it's a Thrutopia. Here's
oh,
my
wonderful.
paper.
Yeah.
And yes, you can use that. And I think he and I have very slightly different concepts of what exactly it is, because
Mm.
I'm not a philosopher. But yes, it's that through line, exactly that. Because if people can see how to get forward, I think what part of the reason we're trapped in what I call the death cult of predatory capitalism is because we can't see there is any possibility. We're told there is no alternative.
Yeah,
And
we
yet there
don't
are
we don't know
obviously,
there's other paths. Yeah.
exactly, as soon as we can, I don't know a single human being who thinks the current system is working. They just can't see a way out.
Yeah, it can be very scary and overwhelming and all of these things, but so I guess I want to try to connect these new paths and your new paths. And when did the podcast come into being? It sounds like a transitional zone. And I wonder what was already initiating this transition from the other kinds of paths you were riding, which are still wonderful, but
Yeah,
these are
good
different
question.
kinds of paths, and how that relates to the podcast.
So I will edit the highlights. I had another shamanic event, and as a result, I ended up doing a master's degree in regenerative economics, which
Oh,
completely was not on my radar at
wow.
all.
That's the Schumacher, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I've heard you mention
So
Schumacher.
so I did that. And that just changed my framing in so many different ways.
That's so cool. So you'd already like you were already successful in many different ways with the vet stuff, but then also with the writing, and then you did another master's.
Yes.
Okay, that's
Yes,
cool.
exactly.
So
Yes,
you put
yes,
yourself
totally out of
back
the
into
blue.
a position of learner. I love
Yeah, I
that.
loved it. God, it was lovely. I was old enough to be grandmother pretty much to everybody on the course, but it was really
But that's
cool.
wonderful. I went back to school
Yes.
for neuroscience
Right,
later than, so
right.
I understand. It's
Oh,
wonderful to do
yeah.
that.
And I wrote my thesis on neuroscience, on the neuroscience of
Oh
language,
wow.
because I
Oh,
thought it was called Whispering to the Amygdala, the
ah,
role of
seriously.
language, frame, and metaphor in the process of transition. Yeah,
Oh,
because
you have to send
because
me that if it's
how
somewhere I want to read that.
it was
No.
yeah. I
All right.
don't think it
Anyway,
would
you
tell you anything you
discovered all of
didn't.
this. So you were,
Yeah,
yeah,
it was
that's
so
fascinating.
exciting. How does language work? And then I thought I'd stopped writing because I was doing the podcast. I came home from that and edited highlight. We set up the Accidental Gods membership group, which is endeavoring to bring people towards the edge of conscious evolution. And then I thought I'll do a few podcasts to explain the neurophysiology underlying the spiritual stuff that we're doing.
So all this
That's the first sign.
regenerative literature, all these people you're talking to, was that already part of your life before you did that
No,
master? Okay,
no.
so all that was like a wash of new worlds. Yeah.
I was probably reading stuff, but it hadn't occurred to me
Okay.
that I could talk to them every week.
Yeah, sure.
It's enormous. You must know. It's like you get to actually ask people that you really respect
Yeah, it's
the
wonderful.
questions that nobody else seems to ask. It's
Mhm.
fantastic.
It's like research for me, but so that makes
Right.
sense to me then that you had this curiosity, you went and did this master to learn, and then this opened up all these new paths, and sort of as your way of continuing that or exploring that, you did the podcast, which has become very successful, and you have a whole kind of community
Yeah.
around that. And did
Yeah.
that then allow you to reopen to the writing process in this way that In a Human Power emerged from?
Well, I guess it did, but I genuinely thought I'd stopped writing because I didn't see the publishing process is so slow. It takes so
Hmm.
long to write a book and then
I
get it
know, I've
out.
actually done it. I know what you mean. It's
And you
crazy.
can record this today and you can put it out tomorrow. It's going to be slightly obsolete, but only very little. Whereas,
And it stays, and everyone's like, you can just,
I
they don't even have
don't
to
even,
buy it. They buy it if
yeah,
they want to buy it. They can do something
exactly.
good for someone, but they don't have to pay
Yeah.
any money.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so I genuinely it was a shamanic instruction. It was a particular, you need to come and sit on the hill at this particular, for an hour every evening at dusk in a particular place and particular frame of mind until further notice. Okay, I'll do that. And then within a week, I had the concepts for the book. And then the instruction was, now you need to write this book. And I've been doing this work long enough not to argue with it, frankly.
Mm.
It's not my job to ask why, it's my job to ask what do you want me to do. And when I get a really clear answer, which this was, then it's my job to do it.
Can you tell me
So
about that a little? Because you've said shamanic now like maybe 3 times, and so I feel like we should unpack that
unpack
a
that
little
a bit.
bit. Like what's that? When did that come into your life? That sounds like it's been around
Oh,
or
that's
been
a
with you.
very long time. Yeah, very briefly, it's been around since my childhood.
Oh.
And then I found ways into training. When I was still a vet student, there was beginning to be the capacity to train in the UK. There was a very short window, narrow window, within which Indigenous peoples from around the world, but primarily North America, were told by their gods and guides and spirits that they needed to teach the white people or we were going to destroy the world. And it was very, not everybody agreed with this. And then about 5 years in, they realized that people were charging $1,000 to completely other random strangers saying, come for a weekend and we'll teach you to be a shaman. Pay me $1,000, I'll teach you to be a shaman in a weekend.
Mm.
And that just blew everybody's brains because always from Boudiccan times, one of the old writers, Herodotus tells us that it was that people used to go to Mona, which we call Anglesey, the island just to the west, off the west of Wales, to train. And it was between 12 and 20 years training. And they would go there from all around the known world, train, and then go back to their people, their villages, their tribes. And these people are going, hey, pay me $1,000, I'll teach you in a weekend. And it's, you can't do that. Really, you can't do that. So
It's
then
painful.
that,
Think about it.
oh, it was horrible. And so then a lot of people who had been giving very freely just stopped. But there were not all, and those of us who were already, I was really lucky that I was in that gap when they were really coming over to the UK and just teaching us. And the Boudica books arose totally out of my shamanic experience. I can tell you the
Okay.
story if you like, but I can't do it very tightly. I could try. Do
If
you
you
want to
want,
try?
or I mean, it's
Um,
or we can,
no, let's
yeah,
just go on.
yeah. I mean,
Let's say
maybe
my entire
that
life
would
is
be a
based on
whole
this.
other podcast to
It
talk
would be
about those
lovely.
books, and I haven't read
Yeah.
them. So,
Okay.
but
So
that does open me to understanding better this book, because I mean, I don't know about shamanism so much. I've definitely am aware of it, and I won't go into my history, but in the book there's a
good.
lot of this interstitial. So here's a question: Did you write a book as a complex system?
Yeah,
Before I
totally. Well
Okay,
done. Thank you. You're
okay,
the first person who's got that.
okay, yeah,
Yes,
great,
totally.
yeah,
Yes, and I had a lot of help. The point about shamanic practice is that the real edited highlight is that this reality is a tiny fraction of all possible realities. With training, it's possible to enter the other realities in order to ask for help. And then most of the time at that 12 to 20 years is learning to differentiate between my ego projections, my wants and my fears, and what's actually coming through. And I've been teaching it now for 20 years, and there's nothing like teaching something for really sharpening up your practice and keeping you doing it.
Oh yeah, we learn
So
what we teach for sure. Yeah,
exactly. And we teach what we most need to learn.
exactly.
And I am far from expert at this, but I enough that I know really when I need to pay attention. And so yes, so I think it's not too much of a spoiler to say that sitting up the hill, the scene that I got was the first opening chapter of the book where there's a woman lying on a bed. Her grandson, 15-year-old, is at her side, and he says, when you come home, can we go and sit up the hill and watch the crows go to bed, which is what I'd been doing.
And there's a
And she
crow
says, no,
outside the window.
yeah, there's a crow outside the window. This is a crow feather.
Ah, okay.
And
Yeah, there's a lot of crows. There's a lot of
there
birds
are
and
crows.
trees and yeah.
Yeah. And she says, I'm not coming home, I'm dying. You do know this, we've talked about this. And in the ensuing conversation, he says, you're the only one who really gets me. I do not want to live in a world with you not in it. And she realizes he's serious, and she says, I don't know what happens next, but if you really need me and you call, if it's possible, I will come. And we all feel the gods pause in their labor and look down and go, okay, that was a promise. You are held to
Yeah,
that.
and we also get the sense that it was not a Freudian slip, but it just happened. Like it wasn't like she'd planned this, and then we
No,
feel
no,
like,
it's a
oh, this is going to set
spontaneous.
up something that we,
Yeah, and she goes, oh
yeah,
my goodness, what have I done? And then she
yeah,
dies.
yeah. But let
And
me stop for a
that's
second,
it.
because this is fascinating. I asked about complex systems and like these scales and nestedness, and all of this is part of that. Um, and also the Thrutopia. So here I think we can relate it a bit, because so we were talking about how we're on these linear paths. I don't think I said linear, but these paths, the system that we're in right now is very linear based, and we assume these dichotomies, and it's like the person who's at the top assumes they either have to keep doing what they've been doing or they're going to lose everything, and it's like a line. And with complex systems, we have we're still trying very hard to learn this, but how to learn how to think multidimensionally and realize towards any goal there's multiple paths, and you can even switch them, and in connecting
Yeah.
paths with other people, you create new paths and all of this, right? And this is what
So
I
I
meant by your
love that you
book.
get
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
showing this in your book, right? And it starts with this moment of complex systems. And the shamanism, I think, relates here too because of the life death. So we're already in that interstitial area of life and death, but not either or. Because the woman who's not very old, actually, but she's dying, and then her young grandson is there, and he can't deal with it. And then not too much later, we see almost the opposite of that. So I guess you did that consciously in a way of creating this, or is it just that your thought process now and your way of being, due to all this learning, that you sort of approach the world in those complex systems way? I wonder about
Yeah.
that.
I would love to claim that I understood all that. I only realized that the complex system thinking when I'd done it. Sitting on the hill, the bits that I was given were that scene and the so she is after she's died, she ends up exactly as you say in the interstitial space between the lands of life and the lands of death, which is a place. One of the features, one of the functions of a shaman is the psychopomp, which is to lead the essence of the newly dead safely to where they need to go so that they don't impact on the living. And so I had a familiarity with that between space. But she's caught there. She can't move on to where she needs to go next because of this promise. And then the crow takes her into the void and teaches her to split the timelines. And that is a shamanic concept. So I was, and the point about this is with extreme skill and extreme danger, and I really didn't realize that people might think this was a clever thing to do. I thought I'd made it really clear that stepping into the void is really, really not the kind of thing that you do without extraordinary amounts of training. Please. But anyway, she goes in and we split all the possible, you can see an infinite array of possible futures, and she sees many of the ones where he does die. But the one you cannot see is the one where you take agency because you haven't yet taken that agency. So the implication, if you're able to stand in the void, split the timelines, is that there may be ways of shifting those futures. And so she's then newly dead, quite shocked, given this, okay, now there might be something you can do. We don't know, but give it a go. Hey, you don't want your beloved grandson to die. What are you going to do about it? And she has to figure out what she can do. And then the only other bit that I was really given was that she needs to do this twice more, for her family and for the whole of humanity. There's one point where she sees all the ways that humanity as a whole could crash and burn. And she knows by then that there is an implication that she could take agency, and perhaps that might not happen. And that really is the principle of the book. There is still a window. We could still do it, but we all need to move together.
And as the book progresses, we begin to see this too as a kind of nested relationship. So we start with the family and we start to understand that there's something about the family itself, the community the family is in, the society that has a similar
Yeah, it's like a Russian doll in a way.
Exactly, which is that complex system kind of thing. And I really like also that you have the birds and the trees are the connection. So this also opens up ways of thinking of throughways or paths that aren't necessarily like the human ones. So that's a really beautiful thing too.
But this is also shamanic thinking. Shamanic spirituality is the original indigenous spirituality of the pre-trauma cultures, in which we know that we are an integral part of the web of life. There is no distinction between human and more than human. And so that it was in the Boudica books. It's in this book partly because this is how I think. And this book, the Boudica books, arose out of my shamanic practice more than anything else. I got to the end of those and I went, to what I go to and said, right, what do I do now? And they went, it doesn't really matter, write what you like. What's important is your teaching. No, tell me what to write. No, it doesn't matter, write whatever you want to write. Do this and this and this. But this is the first time it's like, okay, now write this. And so it arose through and from, and every day I'm going, okay, I need help with this, guys. This is a really complex book. And so a lot of it is just instinctual dreaming. And for me, there is no distinction between human and more than human. And exactly as you said, I am so impressed that you are getting this and so grateful that somebody in the world has got it, who isn't basically one of my students. That part of the problem of the linearity of the way that we have got ourselves to where we are is this idea that the hegemony of the head, that we can think ourselves out of this problem and all thinking is linear. The whole concept of geoengineering, which just, the only thing you can say about that is that the law of unintended consequences is 100% guaranteed to apply. This idea that we're going to seed the clouds with sulfur to make it slightly brighter and then it will reflect the sun and then we can carry on with business as usual, not have to worry about it. You want me to list the ways this could possibly go wrong that you haven't thought about? And all the ways it's going to go wrong that we don't even know until you've done it and then you can't undo it. Bizarre, linear thinking and this concept that we will ever know the answers, that we think in linear ways. We think in complicated patterns where everything is predictable.
Instead of complex,
you turn the wheel right, yes, and the world it's hyper complex now. But we are an integral part of the extraordinary mesh of the web of life. The visions that started the podcast, one of them was of viewing the earth, that the kind of iconic picture of the globe of blue in the pearl and the blackness of space, but all around it, mesh and mesh and mesh and intercrossing was these very, very fine threads. And at every crossing point was a node of consciousness. And some of those were human, but most of them were not. And the integrating that, this was one of those ones that wasn't quite as obvious in clear text, but trying to understand what it meant is what led to Accidental Gods membership and then the podcast. And increasing my practice to how do I really consciously integrate with that web? because then I don't have to, my head doesn't have to take responsibility for figuring out what to do.
Mm-hmm.
What I
Or
do
even
then is,
integrate as that web. I mean, I want to push back a little bit on some of what you're saying,
okay,
just so I can better understand, because how do I say, well, okay, so for example, when you were talking about the geoengineering, I totally get what you're saying, that it's still in that linear way of thinking that we're gonna just solve it by creating technology. However, I also, in the book, you embrace technology. In the book,
oh yeah, I'm not saying
technology is
technology is
very
bad.
important. So I don't hear,
Yeah.
it's not that we couldn't somehow do something technologically that would help. It's more that within that linear mindset, right? That,
Yes.
yeah, okay. And also with the shamanism, because I think we should address it a bit, because a lot of people who listen to this podcast are, well, gosh, there are all kinds of people. So some will get that
Okay.
and some will not. And I feel like that's a similar kind of space where people often think you either believe in these kind of, that you can have visions and that the world is speaking to you, or you don't, or something. And I don't think that's either black and white. I think we all have different ways of understanding that the world around us is communicating with us, you know?
Totally.
And so I guess what I want to ask is, you don't think we're trying to go back to some time in prehistory when everything was wonderful or something? It's not about that,
Totally
because it
not.
could sound
No.
like that.
Oh God, no. We can't go back. And also, no, we can't. We can't. We wouldn't want to. We have to move forward. And I think technology it's part of who we are. Human creativity is astonishing. You and I could not be talking without amazing technology that
Yeah.
didn't exist 10 years ago. And so I'm not anti-technology. I think we need a fundamental shift in our worldview and our sense of what we're here for and how we function in the world and how we make decisions. I want decisions that arise from HeartMind, which is intimately connected to the web of life, and then our head mind works out how to do them. Or decisions that are made, if you don't want to go in for the belief systems, which is completely fine, is we need a value set that we can all agree on. And however we get to that, I would suggest that most of us want to wake up in the morning and feel safe and confident and have a sense of being and belonging. And if we take that as our value set and build out from that, how do we get there? And I would strongly suggest that predatory capitalism is not the answer to that problem. If we can get to that root mindset that everybody agrees with, and then find ways that respect the whole of life, not just human life, but all of life, or even agree that we need to respect all of life, then we can use the extraordinary creativity of humanity. Any of the technology could be used, but it's coming from a place of how do we create a flourishing future that works for everybody within an ecosphere that's actually still alive, not how do we tweak a few things to control everything so we can carry on making money.
I love it that you talk about it being what I would call a mind shift or a cognitive shift, but it's could also be a body shift. This gets to being and doing a bit. This idea that what's really shifting is, I think it's related to these paths, but that's probably because this is part of the work I do, but understanding that we can share values and we can support and get to those values via different paths, not only one path. I mean, there's a way in which we're trying to open up our conception of self, which we could talk about as opening up the way that we think, or our worldview, as you said. And I think this word that you just said, heart mind, is kind of trying to smush that together, being and doing, not even smush it together, but open it up as a multidimensional, non-binary thing. So could you talk about heart mind?
I can, but I don't. I've just released a whole new program on accidental gods on
Oh, just
HeartMind.
on that.
Yeah,
Really? Okay, well,
yeah,
we can
yeah,
just
yeah.
direct people to that
Okay, so for
to
me, the
lead
three
into that.
pillars of the heart mind are gratitude, compassion, and joyful curiosity. And actually getting to the point where those are our foundational affects: gratitude,
Gratitude,
compassion,
compassion.
joyful curiosity. Oh, I
Okay.
love when Zoom does that. Joyful curiosity is,
That's
and all
beautiful,
three of
yeah.
those, if we can get to a point where we are living such that, and it's a physical, for me, it's a physical feeling. My heart space feels vibrant and alive, and I work on it with an image of a fire. You don't have to. Um, it feels like a blazing furnace, and it completely changes my way of being in the world energetically. There's a lot of work with the Heart Math Institute on, particularly on gratitude feeling, but the three components for me are mutually reinforcing and all essential. And the point is, for me, so the teaching that I have, there's head mind, heart mind, body mind.
Okay.
And at the moment in our culture, head mind has this total hegemony where we can basically we are a head that happens to be attached to a bunch of other physical processes that we ignore until they go wrong. And our heart mind is utterly irrelevant. We are told by the dominant culture that coming from this space of heart-based awareness, which I would say is complex, connected, and capable of moving fluidly through time, that this is not valued. The only thing that's valued is the linearity of logic. So how do we reframe ourselves at a physiological level so that our decision making comes from what I would say was heart mind, and then our head mind's job is to work out how to do what our heart mind has decided. And it's a much easier way of living. And I think the reason I've just done this new program is that when we get totally into heart mind, that's when the connection to the web of life happens. And it's impossible to not live in the moment. If you're living in a place of complete gratitude, compassion, joyful curiosity, you are in the moment. You're not, one of my earliest teachers said, we tend to live in bitterness or regret of the past and fear of the future. And we never live in the present. And every spiritual path tells you need to live in the present. And in the present, time is very fluid. Being is very fluid. Reality becomes a completely different thing. So for me, heart mind is, and it frees our head minds up. I think a lot of the trauma and angst and despair in our current culture is because our head minds, our heads, our logic, cortex, whatever we call it, thinks it has to have the answers. And we look at the world and realize that individually and collectively, this is not happening.
This is wonderful.
How do we move beyond it? Yeah. Does that make sense?
It's interesting to me because we come from different, we have different paths towards a similar place or something. Or there's a lot of similarities. And then there's also these very different kind of worlds that we're in. And so for me, what you're describing sounds like embodied cognition and phenomenology and trying to, but that would be too kind of abstracted. But there's a way in which we're, like you said, heart mind comes when we're present, but it's almost like it's there and we've gotten too caught up in noticing our own thoughts and thinking they're real to feel it, isn't it? So there's this kind of coming into the body and being wider and expansive, which is already possible. What does that make sense to you?
Totally does. Yeah, totally. I'm just so awed that you're exactly what you're saying. You got to the same space. You just came from a different route. At college, I got so cross with the phenomenology teacher. It was really not very compassionate. Just because I thought, so you needed some old straight white academic bloke to tell you about something that Indigenous peoples have been doing for 300,000 years, and then it becomes relevant. But that doesn't, if the way into making it relevant
Yeah, but
is
that
to
was probably
listen.
that person's way of discovering what you discovered.
Exactly.
Like I think that's part of what we're
Yes.
trying to do too, is understand that we all come at it from different ways, but we hopefully can meet together in this space if we can. It goes back to that. If we start to understand that there are many throughways or many paths or many ways or to the same place. So, and that becomes interesting in a portal because like when I just discovered you and I already sensed, okay, there's a pattern there that I resonate with. And even though it was from very different place, I thought, okay, let's try to figure out how these, like, I know the pattern, but how did, she get there? And it opened me up to so much, right? If I had just
and
rejected it, like, oh, she's not doing what I do. It's not embodied
No,
cognition. It's not,
absolutely. Yes.
then
And
I would
I'm
have
not
missed
proud
out.
of me in college. I should have, absolutely exactly what you're saying. It doesn't matter how we get to here. It matters that we are here. And then it matters that we join together and work out what are not what are the steps, but how do we figure out what the steps would be? We need to kind of go upstream of ourselves.
Yeah, we need each
and
other's
work
help
that out.
for sure. This in the book, let's get back to the book for a second because I think we can. I was talking about being and doing, but also you do classes about dreaming your death
Shamanic
awake. Is that
dreaming.
right?
Oh, dreaming. Yes, yes.
Okay, so we were talking about life and death and this thing and being and doing, and I feel like in the book you might even say it at some point. There's a kind of edge work going on where you're like pushing to the limits in a way, or people are going to their edges in a way. And that relates to complex systems in a way too, because you get to another node somehow and you find other edges. But there's violence in the book too. And there's, death is not an easy thing. So we're not talking as if everything is okay, but these are hard issues for us as humans. It's like is expressed in the beginning of the book with the grandson. He's really thinking about how's he going to live when he loses someone. We all know that feeling. And you have this wonderful thing with the technology where there's a violence to the technology, or there's also nested layers of violence because something happens. I'm not going to go to in it, but they're using technology in a social media sort of way, and there's something that happens then, and it's in this virtual world, but then very quickly it becomes a violence where you post something or you send something out and it's interpreted in a certain way that people don't understand it. Like maybe they've come from a different path and so they're reacting in a way that you can't control. It does feel violent. And in the book, it manifests as actual kind of something violent. So I don't know if even that's the right word, violence, or how it relates to all this, but I just want to put that out there and see what comes to mind for you.
So the first thing that comes to mind is I love that you get to edge places, because I think shamanic practice exists in the edge places, in the liminal spaces.
Yeah, I like that word,
I
liminal.
just was teaching this last weekend and we spent the entire time, the very first thing that we did, I'm leading and I get to this place and I encounter something and I say the students need to be safe, and oh my guy's going, no, that's not happening. I said, okay, we're leaving then. And they went, no, you can't. And then I checked in and said, so is it dangerous? I need them not to be in danger. And they went, no, it's okay, it's not dangerous. And we were in that space that I had never really explored, that liminal virtual space between not being safe and yet not being in danger. And so the edge places are where everything is alive. And so the violence you're talking about in the book starts off as toxicity, social media toxicity, and then explodes into actual real world violence, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. A lot of this book, I'm not one of these people who plots and then writes. I just explore what's happening, and it's okay, that happened. So, and then how are we going to deal with that, guys? So, but I think,
I wasn't expecting it either, by the way, reading it. So I think that's good when you write like that, because then the reader is
yes,
going,
you've not signaled it because you didn't know it was coming.
Exactly.
I want this book to feel real. It needs to be embedded in where we are. And I am 100% certain that the evolution, the emergence to a new system has to be nonviolent. I think the use of violence to solve problems is of the old paradigm, and the new system, that will not be the case. So if we're using, and everybody who's ever used violence to try and change a system has ended up recreating the old system, because that's what violence does. And I think it's an inherent part of our trauma culture. And I suspect, I think it's very likely that if we do get a global movement together, and I'm watching the student encampments and thinking, my goodness, you're actually doing, it's not arising from the same motivations, but you're doing. And I'm trying to, I drove into the middle of Wales yesterday to deliver a box of 10 books to go to the Cardiff encampment, because first of all, thank you. And second, I think you'll find there's quite a lot of resonance here. And I had a friend in the Netherlands who is a lecturer, was going to take one to an encampment at her university, and she emailed me and said they bulldozed it at 3 o'clock this morning. Oh shit. And then the next day she sent me a picture of, and I said, is this the bulldozing? And she said, no, that's the barricade the students have built. And the bulldozer is going to have serious trouble getting through that. So the encampment is back up. Wow. So if there is going to be a global movement, the only thing the establishment knows what to do is to exert violence. And then one of the many, many questions of the second half of the book is, how do we hold true to a value system that says we're not going to be violent? We're going to move at the pace of trust, and we're going to build trust, and we're going to create social media that bridge instead of creating divides. Give me the incentive and I will give you the outcome. And the current incentive for social media is to make already rich people obscenely more rich. And the best way to do that is to create online outrage. What happens if we don't want to do that? What happens if we want to build social media that actually help people bridge across divides? How are we going to use, what social technologies will help us to bring by then large numbers of people into confluence. And how are we going to do that knowing that some of those people are going to be in there with the express intent of destroying what we're doing, and yet not allow ourselves to fall into witch hunting and distrust? Those are, I think those are going to be real questions. And I wanted to model a way of approaching them. Does that answer the question that you
Yeah, it
asked?
does. I think what I hear you saying is, so part of the book is, at least how I see it, learning how to kind of inhabit different positions, even if it's only in imagination at first, towards being able to see these different paths in the way that I'm saying. And I guess what I was trying to get at is it's not an easy process. And as a teacher, and even when you're doing with the shamanism and so on, and what you just described with that edge work, these aren't easy processes always. And what we think of as violence has many scales and nessedness to it too. And whether it's individual or whether it's group, and it's something I don't know how to talk about yet, but in the book, there are a lot of cracking open kind of moments that aren't, that's what death is in a way, or that's what a lot of these shocking things are. And I guess what I hear you saying is we're going to open the space to that, but we're going to try to do it in a way that's anchored, is a word I think in the book that comes.
And grounded.
Yeah,
Another word.
and grounded.
Yeah, yeah.
And then in the second part of the book, that makes sense because then it turns to, I don't mean this literally, but I was thinking of this book I liked a lot as a kid called Sophie's World. Do you know that book? It's
I've
like
heard of it, but I haven't read it. I'm sorry.
it's a book about a girl who gets a letter saying, "Who are you?" or something. And so she's trying to understand it. And what it really is you don't know it when you're reading it, but it's a pretty much like an intro to philosophy book. You basically learn about
Oh,
all kinds of philosophies, but you're just,
right.
in the
But you're
story of the
exploring.
girl. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
So I thought about
Right.
the second part of the book, especially as almost like with Accidental Gods, you've learned all these new ways, I would call it, or throughs, ways, or whatever, paths. And in that part of the book, you're giving them to us through the book. I probably didn't recognize half of them, but even sometimes some of your guests appear, for example, the Riversimple, which is
Riversimple's there. Yeah.
yeah,
With their
Douglas,
permission. I
I
did
think
ask them.
Rushkoff is there. Yeah,
Yeah,
so they
yeah,
come literally there sometimes, but
yeah.
I also think a lot of that thought and a lot of what you're doing in that podcast comes through there, almost
Yeah.
like did you see it as kind of a way to help
Yes.
teach and learn?
Oh, well, totally. Yes, because I think, the podcast has a certain audience, but we're talking to a particular bubble. The thing about a thriller is it reaches much, much wider. And so for a lot of people, these will be completely new ideas. And there is nothing. Okay, so Ray's catamaran I made out of nowhere, but I built it up. It's got
But
the
it
same
could be,
engines as the Riversimple cars. I don't
yeah,
see
it
any
could,
reason why it
yeah,
couldn't exist.
yeah.
Everything else is happening somewhere in the world. All that I've done is bring them into one coherent movement. There's a point where some of the characters put forward 3 suggestions for political change, and I didn't make any of them up. I just brought them all into one place.
Oh, okay.
So
Hmm.
it's from that point of view, it's not original, but that was part of it was deliberate because I wanted to be able to have this conversation and say, guys, this is happening. This is not me sitting in my room imagining stuff. Every single thing here is happening somewhere. Just let's bring them all together and
Yeah.
have
Hmm.
a kind of weaving between them so they have a coherent impetus behind them.
That speaks also to this layering that happens that we've already demonstrated in our own lives in a way where this embodied learning, or the way that cognition isn't only a very small part of what mind is, or what embodied,
Yeah,
I don't think of mind as in the brain, but this
I
embodied
know
mind is
exactly.
something you're
Yes,
aware of. So I
right.
think also, like, through our creations, we learn without having put our attention on what we've learned. So in the similar way, I was asking you about if you're writing complex systems almost in an embodied sense. I think you've taken in so much of it that it's now patterned you in a certain way, or patterned your actions
I'm sure.
in a certain way, which I
Yeah.
noticed. There's something about the book too that's helping people to maybe change those patterns, or find new patterns, or open up their repertoire of possible
Yeah.
patterns without them having to think about it and read it like
Yes.
as if it's study.
Exactly, because you and I might read, I don't know, Kate Raworth, Jason Hickel, whatever,
Yeah.
but people don't, most people, and yet fiction is it's a way of reaching people. And we are a storied species. Everything we've done for 300,000 years has been based on stories. We tell ourselves and each other about ourselves and each other. It's what we do. So if I can tell a story where people can identify with somebody in the book and feel them moving forward, and we do stuff because we're inspired. We don't do stuff because we think it's going to be easy. Nobody climbs Everest because they think it's going to be easy. They climb it because they can imagine standing on the top and feeling absolutely wonderful. And so if I can create that sense of, look, here's a future that's different. It's not what we're all imagining about, Mad Max and The Road meets Handmaid's Tale. It's different and it's doable. And you would be proud to leave this to your kids. And here's actually how it could happen. Let's just make it happen, people.
Yeah, I think that's very important, and also speaks to this other dichotomy of, we think of things as, and this is a hard one, but fiction or nonfiction, or like Thrutopia as, I think, is it presented as fiction at first, as like, the stories we're telling, literally the way that we're writing and creating. And it's so important. I don't think we realize how much our TV, our books, all this even media really does what we were just talking about, that layering of showing us what the paths are, and we're walking these paths and we don't even know, we haven't chosen them, we don't even know we're walking them, we don't know there's others.
Yeah.
So fiction is so important for that, but also the podcast is nonfiction. It's people's real stories about their real life, things they're doing in their life that are also narratives. I don't know. How do you hold those at the same time? Do you try to distinguish between them?
I don't. No, I think it's a really good observation, because the world that we live in, you must know, framing and metaphors, and there's so much about language. I was speaking yesterday for my podcast with Osprey Oriel Lake, who's written a beautiful book, I think you'd love it, called The Stories in Our Bones. And she talks, I think it's, for me, it's going to be the braided sweetgrass of this decade. And she talks about language, and about English is a language of to be. And that defines our separation from the world. I am this, as opposed to that. And there's a lot of Indigenous languages are much more fluid and much more verb-based. And so we are presented with a world in which there are fictional stories that somebody made up, and you read stuff in the newspapers that is true. And yet, I'm pretty sure about now, people are realizing that they're seeing videos online of things that are happening around the world and reading the stories in the newspaper, and actually there is a complete mismatch. And so everything, and I have a vision. So Thrutopian, for me, it's anything. There's a Thrutopian poetry book just being published. It can be nonfiction, it could be a blog, it could be a TikTok video. I don't care. Whatever it is that's helping us towards a different future. But I think also, I really want everyone who writes, particularly fiction, movie scripts, TV scripts, imagine if we woke up tomorrow and the producers in Hollywood or Netflix or wherever could not get a script except one that was imagining a different way forward. No publisher could get a novel that, crime novels, romance novels, whatever genre you want. They were all going, you know what, the system is not serving us anymore. Here's a different one. Let's imagine the way forward. Because everything else is propaganda for the old system. I had a friend who used to write for one of the very long-running British television soaps. Is that right? Yes.
Soap operas, I guess, in the States
okay.
is what we call them.
Okay, yeah. And he used to write the characters taking out the recycling. It wasn't big radical stuff. And every single time it was written out.
Oh.
And eventually he went to the producers going, what's wrong with taking out the recycling? And I quote him verbatim. They said, our income depends on people wanting to have a new granite worktop in their kitchen every year. We are not giving them a suggestion that they could keep the old one. It's really deliberate propaganda. Everything that is written that supports the old paradigm now, as far as I'm concerned, is propaganda for death cult. Let's not do it. If anyone who's listening to this is a fiction writer, please stop writing the existing system. It is not serving us.
Gosh, it's so hard. It's so hard to think about how to do that, though, in the way that we've been talking, because it's not going to help if we just say you can't write like that anymore, because there'll be protests, and because people don't understand that what you were saying is, I mean, actually, it's not about.
Shall we unpick that a little bit? Tell me
Yeah,
why you
because
think there'll be
let me say this and
protests.
then you can say
Okay.
what you're saying. It's
Yeah.
messy, but that's good. The person who's writing is gonna need to do it from an embodied place that's
Yes.
authentic for them. How do
Yes.
they get to that place? And a lot of it is not, it's not that what they want in the same way that the destination that they want can still be the same. It's just about envisioning a different path to it and they already exist. So if they could only become aware that it exists and that actually they can feel better and get more of what they actually want on that path, then it's going to happen maybe very quickly. But that's the shift I see. But now that's kind of messy. You tell me what
No,
comes to
that's
mind.
exactly what I just said. I mean, that's what I was trying to say, only you said it
Okay.
better. I'm not so saying we tell people that they can't. I'm encouraging people to listen to Amitav Ghosh. It is not the job of politicians and bureaucrats to imagine a different future. That's the job of artists and creatives. It's our job. It's our duty. We are facing near-term human extinction. Do you want to keep writing crime thrillers where everything carries on exactly as it was, or do you want to do the internal work, which is hard? I'm not suggesting it's not hard. There were days when I got up and thought, I just can't do this. But I'm a white Western person. I have I have acres of privilege, and I feel it's my, being uncomfortable, frankly, is if I'm a bit uncomfortable, but I'm doing something that actually might change everything, let's go with the leaning into the discomfort and see where it takes me. And where it takes me is
And have you
the book
found
that
that
you've
this
got.
gives you a different sensuality or a different does it expand your sense of uh what the body is and what sensuality is? And is there, because I feel like it's not, it
It's a
is a lot of
very
hard work
interesting
and it,
question.
but there's something that happens, at least for me, I don't know if it is for you, but that it is like a practice. And I don't know, there's some kind of way in which there's something to it that changes the
Yeah.
way that you are in the world.
Yes, absolutely. Totally. Yes. Yes. I probably wouldn't have said it like that, but that's what I was trying to express when I said that my heart space feels different.
Mm.
My way of being in the world feels different. My sense of myself as part of a much, much wider community, that connection to the web of life, which I think, you'll know there's a lot of talk. We could look at Panksepp's drives, but maybe we don't want to get that geeky. But there's the kind of dopamine hits that are short term, and you always need a little bit more to get the same effect. And they don't create proper networks. They just sing across the brain, and you have that little moment of zing, and then
Yeah,
you've
and
got
then you
spot.
need more and
And
more.
then there's
It's
the
not like the
serotonin
serotonin.
mesh that is self-supporting and reinforcing and has duration. And I think living in that serotonin mesh, I think, is what would, for me, define what Francis Weller calls an initiation culture. And this constant seeking after dopamine is what absolutely is the hallmark of our trauma culture. And I think that the shamanic practice has given me that sense of connectedness, of being and belonging. And then that is what feeds the book. There were mornings I got up and thought, I can't do this. But what my practice is to go, I need help. And then the
Mm,
help arrives, and okay, yes, I can do it. Just because it's
mm,
hard doesn't mean I can't do it.
mm.
It's just hard.
That's powerful. I was going to ask you about how, because as I was talking, I was expressing it as an individual thing, but I also meant within the complex
Okay,
system that's close to
right.
you. I didn't say it like that, but so you've started this community, Accidental Gods, then in the podcast and the book, and you have classes. And I don't know if that's similar to the way the 20 years of your life before that was, or if that's been different, or because that's also a kind of practice that can be very uncomfortable and putting yourself out there, going to the edge, teaching,
Yeah.
learning, not getting to be some where you think you're a guru, always balancing.
Yes.
What
Yes.
about that? How has that changed, or has it changed, or
Yeah, yeah. It's
how does that
constantly evolving. But that I think that's part of the nature of this kind of work, exactly as you're saying. Every time you sit in circle and lead a circle, there's that exactly that balance of let's just park my egos somewhere else because it's not useful in this circle. And and like my writing, my teaching is very much I will just stay balanced in the moment and ask what's needed just now. I don't prescript any of it. So it's always got that edge place sense to it. But that's where the aliveness comes. And so there's the
Mhm.
community of people I've been teaching for 20 years now. So I've got 20 years. I now have an apprentice. And so that's taken I now have to explain not only now we have, this is the structure, we do have an actual structure, but but everything within it is really fluid. And I discovered this weekend, we were talking to the guy who runs the center, and he holds courses with his Buddhist master. And he said, I have all this structure. And then he changes it on the fly. And Lou went, oh, do I do that too? Yes, I probably do. I'm so sorry. And exactly that, this is the structure, but we're going to abandon it if it feels like that's what the circle needs. And so I now need to teach here is the iceberg. This is what the students see, and this is all that's going on underneath. And now we need to try it. And so everything is always changing. Everything is always growing. And the mesh, exactly what you're talking about, that sense of connectedness of the web of life being utterly alive and utterly present in the moment is always changing. There's a metaphor in horse riding, which I'm sure probably didn't arise there, which is you're peeling an onion and it's still growing from the inside out. And that's exactly where we are. And this is partly what gives me hope that there is still this window to turn the bus, is we're getting so much help. Would we be getting this kind of really explicit help if we were just driving ourselves over the edge of a cliff? I mean, that's a belief system. And I would be doing what I'm doing anyway, because it's there to be done. And I'm not going to, if we go over the cliff, it won't be because I didn't try hard enough. But I think there is still time to turn the bus.
I definitely think so. And, someone can go listen to your podcast and you get a feeling of that. And there's so many wonderful people in the world doing amazing things with good intentions. And we forget that. And people who are learning, and we're all learning. I mean, nobody's mastered this, of course, because that's kind of what we're trying to do, is realize we all need each other. Like you said, you couldn't do it when you got out of bed, so you asked for help. That is such a hard thing to learn how to do. But also, it's so amazing when we can learn that other people are also our power and we're the power of others. That's what I was trying to get at with that idea of self-changing. And I think a lot of people on your podcast, they all are at least trying to connect differently in that mesh, have a different idea of what self is, and what the connection with all these people around them forming something can give in a new way that they can't give alone, which is very different from that linear mindset. So there's that kind of opening.
Yes.
Does that make you hopeful too? Your book is
totally.
ultimately very hopeful. So
thank you. Yes, I mean, it's intended that, and I'm writing the sequel, 7,000 words in.
I figured that it was, we now need to know how it's going to happen. Yeah.
Yes, and I'm expecting there'll be 3, but who knows? And I think, have you ever read The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wengrow?
Yeah, well, I have it now. It's a very important new one of those shifts, right? Look at it this way historically.
Yeah, totally.
Wonderful.
Everything is different. And I think one of the things that really struck me there was the man whose name I can never pronounce, Kadir or something, of the Wendat, who we used to call the Huron, who lived in cities I never knew, and who went to France and came back and was completely shocked by, this is pre-revolution France, and you have kings and you have people starving on the streets, and you have this bizarre hierarchy where God tells the Pope, who tells the archbishops, who tell everybody, who tell the men, who tell the women, who tell the children. And he said, nobody tells me what to do, ever. How does this happen? But also, if somebody is starving in our people, everyone is starving. And if someone has food, everyone has food. And that wasn't that was, it's not quite within living memory, but it was within recorded history. So I think a lot of what we're doing is rediscovering our birthright. I absolutely do not think we go backwards. We are moving forwards. Whatever we're heading to, this emergence into a new system, is humanity in a different place. But I believe we are born expecting that serotonin mesh of connectivity, of being and belonging, of being part of a tribe that cherishes us and that supports our growth and gives us. Weller says the difference between an initiation culture and a trauma culture is that in an initiation culture, there are contained encounters with death. And the containment is held by the shamans, the elders, the land, the ancestors, the people, the web of life. And that by being taken to the edges of death, we discover who we are. We discover how to ask for help, and that help will come, and how we as individuals can shine. And then we have that sense of respect, which is another serotonin. It's part of what we need, is that sense of pride in what I do, and that I respect other people and I'm respected in my turn for what it is that I am good at. And we are born expecting that, and then we end up in this culture where none of that is really on tap. But it could be. It could be. And so part of what the book is doing is opening doorways to that being at least a possibility, and something that what happens if we have that and all of our current technology? Where would that take us? I have no idea, but I think it would be really exciting to find out.
Yeah, we can't imagine it, but we can kind of imagine the orientation of it. And I think there's a reason why complex systems has become such a thing we all use and understand across disciplines in a different way over the last whatever years, because I think what you just described, there is some way we're all in many different ways trying to understand how to open up what the self is and what we think of it, what we think we are. And in so doing, we open up what we want and desire and the values, to go back to what you said at the beginning. And once we start doing that, the shifts it's really like a transformational. It's very transformational.
We
We can't
we
imagine
get
how it would all go.
exponential change. I think
Yeah,
it
yeah.
stops being linear incremental and it becomes exponential, and tipping points happen, and we don't know where the tipping points are or what the critical mass is, but we can be pretty certain that they exist.
Yeah, and it's hopeful that we want that. I mean, that that we're sort of turned on by these new patterns and moving towards them, and seeing things a little bit more clearly. But there's just two things before we go. The book, it's very interesting. I mean, talking about all of this, something that I think is very hard to apply it to is when we think of politics. We could go to economics or politics. You do talk to a lot of people on your podcast about these things too. And of course, it's incredibly important. It's very different. I mean, I live in the Netherlands, which is one way. You're living in a different world there. And I'm from the States, which is a whole different world. So like none of these are exactly the same political system.
But
But
they're within the guidelines of a particular frame.
there's the orientation, right? That the patterns are very similar. So just very briefly in the book, it kind of ends up that the revolution might actually come through something like voting or something like actual
yes, or it might
choice,
not. Who
or
knows?
it might
Because
not.
we end at the night after a general election where everything has changed. So I genuinely believe we need to work peacefully. I work a lot with Joanna Macy's 3 pillars of the Great Turning. Are you familiar? So holding actions, systemic change, shifting consciousness. And by the end of the book, we have something of a divide within the movement, and part of them want to make change through the existing system, which has been significantly shifted. And another group is going to go and set up and do what Audrey Tang did in Taiwan and fork the government. And so part of the new book I want to do is exploring what happens when the forking the government, because they've got a completely separate but very obviously legitimate group of people who could be making governmental decisions about governance in a completely different way and with a completely different frame. At the moment, all 3 nations that you mentioned, the US, the Netherlands, the UK, we have governance by consent. And at the point where we remove that consent and decide we want different shapes of governance, we could do it. And then, the people in Washington or Westminster or wherever they are in the Netherlands just become a small clique doing their own thing. And we just go, you do what you want to do. It doesn't matter. We would need a different economic frame also. But I am also really believe that current fiat currencies are imposed by violence. And so one of the other things I want to explore is how do we create a way of sharing, exchanging, storing, and accounting for value that is not predicated on implicit or explicit violence. And these are big things, and you have to carry people with. This is not the kind of question you could ask at the beginning of a book, or nobody would read it. But by the end of a book, at least it's open as I wonder what if. So the second book, I don't want to write a book where you have to have read the first one to understand the second one. So it's proving quite interestingly mind-bending to
So you've already
start
started it.
with. I wanted to get a decent amount under my belt before the new one comes out. How do we ease into that, but without having to relitigate everything that's gone before? But yeah, we
It
need
really is a scaling
governance
of what we were just talking about with when I asked you about, I sort of started with the individual of this embodied sensual, different feeling of what life is, which is very hard to describe, the phenomenology of it. But then, that's actually a group or a, family is a really anchor of this book. And it doesn't have to be family in a traditional sense, but just the
Yeah.
family and this anchor and
Yes.
this, that you can ask someone for help. Like that exists. Like if we can, I feel like a lot of this community that's maybe building with accidental gods and the people you talk to and the work a lot of us are
And
doing in
what you're
completely
doing.
different ways.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
trying to create that space where we can be here for each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I ask on accidental gods, I haven't got an answer to yet, and you might have, is how do we build the umbrella that connects? I didn't know that you were going to take us here. I'm so excited that you are thinking in the ways you're thinking. And now we know, but there will be dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of other people around the world that neither of us knows about. But if we could all connect, we're all zoomed out. We all have, our time microtomed. How do we connect and find the common values and share ideas without imposing on each other? And I don't have answers to that, but I think it's necessary. And I think it's one of the things that if we could create social media that was designed to build bridges and to share instead of dividing people, that would become a lot easier.
Yeah. I think we're doing it in a way. And I think it has to do with this, having these kind of
Yeah.
conversations. A lot of people are doing this now on many different scales and levels. And for a very, for a reason that is that embodied thing that I'm trying to
Mm.
describe. And it
Mm.
is like communities are forming that are really there for each other in a different way. And I think it has something to do with that. I don't know how it all gets sorted and kind of comes together. Actually, I was talking to Ian McGilchrist, and he was telling me that he has someone do all his social media because he can't stand it. And I was thinking, well, what if we all had someone doing
Mm.
our, like, what if we were tied and meshed and webbed in that way where we were promoting one another? Uh,
Yeah,
I don't know. I
that'd
don't
be
know. There's
interesting.
something in there, but I don't know what it is. And it is not necessarily
Yeah.
social media, but some new way of thinking about what we're doing with technology, maybe.
Yep. Yep. And I
Maybe.
think, again, I'm an enormous fan of Audrey Tang in Taiwan. They they had a general election, I think, in January, and the People's Republic of China was definitely going to come in, and they did what they called pre-bunking of creating videos 2 years in advance of this is how fake videos are created, and this is what they look like, and this is how you can tell if they're not. And part of the way that we tell is that you create networks of people you have actually met
Hmm.
so that you can trust the people in. And then the algorithm, if you go, look, I think this might be a fake video, and all your friends go, yeah, it looks fake to me too, the algorithm will learn. And then it will come and go, hey, this is very similar to that video you thought was fake. Do you think this is fake too?
Hmm.
And they're also building social media where explicitly the comments at the margins that are designed to inflame go nowhere. And there is kudos and likes and extra happy things that happen when you build bridges with people on the other side of any divide. And
Yeah.
then they get groups of 10 of people that the algorithm says these are 10 people who all think differently about whatever the topic is. And they can have tens of thousands of these because social media, because technology, bring you all into a Zoom room equivalent. And again, how can you build bridges until you found a way that all of you have found something you agree about with whatever this topic is, and then you tell us, and we will implement that in our governance structure. This is happening in Taiwan. It could happen anywhere
Wow.
in the
I didn't know
world.
about that. That's very
It's
exciting.
really
Yeah.
interesting. It's
And
really
there's the
exciting. I'll send you a
possibilities
link.
of that. Just imagining
Yeah.
a blockchain that's like trust
Yes.
based, you know.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
possible. If I mean, it's absolutely
Totally
possible.
is. Yeah.
And even being able to, if you're part of a group or something that you really trust, and that small group being itself the resource or the reservoir of that social media. And also this, as you're talking, trying to understand that it's always dynamic and changing, and understanding that what we're using is a static representation of something that's
Mm.
alive and processual
Yes.
and changing. I think
Yes.
that little tiny thing, we assume the map is a territory all the time,
Yeah.
and
Yes. But it's alive. And
it's
this is
alive.
alive. This
Yeah,
conversation
yeah,
is
yeah.
alive just now. It's glorious.
It
So
is.
impressed. Thank you.
Well, to end, I have to come to this word love. There's a beautiful thing in the book. You talk about weaving a lot in the book, and we've talked about the mesh, and we've talked about paths, and all of this is like a similar feeling. And I think you say something like the threads of love, or some threads of love will weave your path. So this is love and philosophy and beyond dichotomy, and there's a million things, but I wonder about that word. In a way, we've been talking about it the whole time, I guess.
Hmm.
But how does it resonate with you, and how do you talk about it? Do you not talk about it in terms of all
Yeah,
this
totally.
that you're creating and doing and putting into the world?
Yes, I talk about it. I have just come out of therapy. We talked about
Ah.
nothing else for about an hour. We're not going into that.
Mhm.
So three pillars of the heart, mind, gratitude, compassion for self and others. I think it's a bit like in England, there's only one word for rain, and I'm actually Scottish, and there's about 150 words for rain because we get quite a lot of rain.
Oh, wow.
And I'm exaggerating a bit, but not by much. And in Rome, even in Rome, height of the trauma culture, I think they had 9 different words for love, and we just have the one. We have compassion, um, and adoration. But it's our language limits us. But love, for me, that aliveness in my heart space, and going out into the world and going, God, I love you. To the whole of the web of life is intrinsic to who I am and to how I am and to how I want to show up in the world. And we could get very esoteric and talk about energetics, and that again, it might be a whole other podcast. But I think the energy with which we show up in the world is probably the single most important thing that defines how the world works. And it's a choice. I choose. I could go out into the world and be in horror and despair quite easily, or I can go out into the world and look at a tree and go, God, I love you. Or the chickens, or the red kite, or the hill, or a concept. And I think it's absolutely fundamental. And it doesn't mean that I don't also feel outrage and despair and horror and I cannot believe these things are happening at things around in the world. But the textures, the wave, if you like, of my personal energy is gratitude, compassion, and for me, joyful curiosity that, wow, that's amazing. I wonder what happens next. That is the disconnect that frees my brain up from thinking it knows what happens next. But getting into that space of, I have no idea what happens next is what brings the world into that sharpness of anything is possible. And I am in the moment, balanced, waiting. But it has to come from that grounding of compassion and absolute gratitude, which I think are, I think love for me is that melding of those three. And then I am in love with living. And if I am in love with the process of being alive, then I am fully alive and I am doing whatever is my best expression of that love. And this book is that, and the podcast and the next book and everything else. Did that make sense, or did that
That's
sound
wonderful.
really
That's
flaky?
beautiful. And I really feel it. I think it really comes through in your presence. I think that word presence is important. And I mean it on this complex system, multiple nested level that we started everything with, that there's this layering, there's this vulnerability, there's this amazing strength, there's this desire to learn. One senses it for sure in what you're doing. So I just want to
Thank
send you
you.
gratitude for that and tell you also the joyful curiosity is definitely a state you help people to reach and with your work. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Honestly, thank you. This has been the most inspiring conversation. I'm so glad we met.
Me too. Me too. Truly.
Thank you.
I already
Yeah,
felt it before I met you in person here, or if you can call it in person, but truly,
this was in person.
it's a wonderful meeting. So
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you. And I hope your listeners and viewers are similarly inspired because that would be rather wonderful.
Yeah, me too.
So,
So we
super.
send them love
Thank you.
too already.
Yes, totally. Thank you,
All
everybody, for
right.
being there.
Yes, thank you. Have a beautiful day, Manda, or evening.
Yes.